Kuchma. And Kuchma told me something long after he was president. You may recall that during the height of the Orange Revolution, Putin kind of summoned Kuchma to Moscow. They met at the airport, and Kuchma heard from Putin, you have to crack down on the demonstrators. And Kuchma told Putin, you don't understand, Ukraine is not Russia. I can't do that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Talk for Ukraine, the Transatlantic channel for the support of freedom and democracy. My name is Christoph Müller, and I am here in Germany, Bonn. Our today's guest is one of the most prominent American diplomats of the recent decades and a highly influential voice in Washington when it comes to Eastern European security. And he's the head of the think tank Atlantic Council. And in the years 2003 to 2006, he was the ambassador of the United States in Ukraine. By the way, that was exactly the time when I met my Ukrainian wife in Kyiv. So I was there when you have been ambassador in Ukraine. Before we dive in, a quick personal announcement to the audience. This August, I'm going to travel directly to Ukraine to bring you boots on the ground reporting and exclusive interviews. A trip like this costs quite some money, and so I like to ask you, the audience, for your help. Every small donation, like $5 or euros, or less, is highly appreciated. You can do so by checking the link down below for Buy Me a Coffee. But I'm also very happy if you just like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It's free and really helps the channel to reach more people. It's a huge honor to speak with you today. Welcome to the channel, Ambassador John Herbst.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
John, yesterday I've been talking with a colleague of yours, a man whom you know well, Ambassador Kurt Volker. And we have been talking about a topic that currently shakes the political situation in Ukraine. It's the case of Mykhailo Fyodorov. Last Wednesday, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has dismissed his highly efficient and popular defense minister Mykhailo Fyodorov after being only 6 months in office. Fyodorov, despite being young, has already a long list of huge successes on the battlefield, in the war economics, and in fighting corruption. His 6 months changed the war completely in favor to Ukraine. Maybe all Russian ships inside the Azov Sea have been destroyed. Crimea is untenable. Refineries all over Russia are burning and being destroyed. Russia is on the losing path. Despite these merits, Defense Minister Fyodorov was suddenly dismissed out of nothing. Moscow was cheering. They loved it. And Zelensky kept Fyodorov's counterpart, the Soviet-style chief of staff, Syrsky. They both didn't like each other. And just 2 days ago, Zelensky fired Syrsky again and replaced him by the younger and NATO-style General Mykhailo Fyodorov, who is close to Fyodorov and also has proven to be highly effective and courageous. So let me ask my first question after this long introduction. I would love to hear also your take on that. Why did Zelensky want to get rid of Fyodorov instead of the old-fashioned style General Syrsky?
Okay, let me start out by providing a slightly different view of Syrsky. Mm-hmm. I think he's been a competent commander, although it is true that his view of how to conduct a war is more old-fashioned than Fyodorov's. And it's also true that the great success Ukraine has enjoyed over the past 3.5 months in the war is due to Fyodorov's innovations, not to Syrsky's reliance on older-style thinking. But again, he has done a competent job as the chief general in Ukraine, and before that as a very senior general. But I think Drapati, who looks at war in a way similar to Fedorov, is better suited to the moment. And I would say that even with Fedorov out of the Ministry of Defense and Drapati in as the new commanding general, Ukraine is in a better situation in terms of the overall war effort than it was 2 weeks ago. Okay, that's a general comment. But Fedorov, again, has been the principal reason for Ukraine's success over the past 4 months. And removing him was a mistake. Now, why did Zelensky make this mistake? Because Zelensky has been an outstanding war leader. My sense is, and it's based upon a fair amount of insider information, is that he was persuaded to take this step because many of his advisors wanted to get rid of Fedorov. And I think this relates to at least three issues. One is that Fedorov is a strong advocate for his point of view, and that point of view was not welcomed by the then commanding General Syrski. And so people wanted there to be cooperation amongst the senior leadership as the war went on. That's perhaps the best reason for removing him. A second reason is that Fedorov really was reforming the procurement process in the Ministry of Defense and removing, let's say, factors other than merit and cost as reasons for choosing one weapons provider over another. And people who lost out as Fedorov cleaned up procurement were not happy. And I think that was reflected in the conversations with President Zelensky. And the third is that the Ukrainian public understands how effective Fedorov has been as a leader. And so right now he has very high poll ratings. And that's something which President Zelensky worries about as a politician. So I think those three factors combined led to a serious mistake. And it's a serious mistake first and foremost because it was unhelpful to Ukraine's prosecution of its existential war. But a serious mistake too politically because Fedorov is legitimately popular among Ukrainians. So we've seen demonstrations going on for over a week demanding the reinstallation of Fedorov as defense minister and the firing of Syrski. Zelensky took the easier step of firing Syrski, but the demonstrations continue. So I think this story is not over, and Zelensky may need, for political reasons as well as geopolitical reasons, to restore Fedorov. Now, I'm not predicting that will happen, but I think the odds of that happening are growing.
So your estimate is that Fyodorov will be reinstalled?
Well, no, I think there's a good chance, but it's not a sure thing. And I'm not even willing to say it's a 51% chance, but it's a substantial chance he'll be restored. Because I'm not sure that Zelensky is going to be able to deal with the protests unless he restores Fedorov.
We both know the Ukrainian people. You know them well better than I, but I have already seen also the Orange Revolution in 2004. The people were not satisfied with bad political decisions. That was those days, Yanukovych coming into place with falsified elections. And so the Ukrainians are a people who are really protesting, and they are purely democratic people. They are a role model for all the democracies, I would say.
Right.
And so when the will of the people is that Fyodorov will be reinstalled, why can anybody dare to say, maybe he will not do this? Do you think that Zelensky is so unwise to?
I think that any president does worry about his authority and his image, and no president, in fact, very few human beings like to reverse a decision they make very publicly, and to make it under pressure. But we've seen Zelensky make serious mistakes before on domestic-related issues. I mean, this happened a year ago when they were trying to neuter the two anti-corruption agencies, but massive protests led Zelensky to reconsider.
Right.
And again, I don't think we would have seen Syrski drop were it not for the massive protests. But Zelensky was hoping that between changing Syrski, putting in Drapati, and offering Fedorov some type of role in the National Security and Defense Council, he would fix the problem, the political problem. But Fedorov seems to be insisting on his returning to the ministry. And again, given the very strong feelings of Ukrainian civil society, the half measure that Zelensky is offering Fedorov may not solve the political problem that Zelensky's decision created, in which case he may need to actually reverse course. So again, I think that's a real possibility, but real possibility is not the same as saying it will definitely happen.
Yeah, we don't have this famous crystal ball. We don't know, and we are not God. We don't know what's going on in the future. But unlike many leaders, also Western leaders, but of course the Soviet-style communist and Russian leaders, Zelensky is somebody who's able to admit mistakes, and he says he can. Do you see a possibility that he will apologize? He will say, "That was a mistake." Will this weaken or strengthen him a step like that?
I think that as long as there are serious protests, he has a political problem, which weakens him. And for that reason, I think he may ultimately decide he needs to put Fedorov back at the Ministry of Defense. But look, what this whole episode shows, just as the episode a year ago with the anti-corruption agency shows, is that Ukraine is a democratic society. Right. We know there are lots of people in Russia who are uneasy about Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine, but they are passive. And there's some criticism, but it's rather timid because it's a harsh authoritarian regime, the opposite of democracy. Ukraine is a democracy, imperfect, but real. And this whole episode shows that. And, as you mentioned, I was ambassador in Ukraine during the Orange Revolution. And at the time, I had a great deal of interaction with President Kuchma. And since Kuchma's retirement, and I've been working on Ukraine from the Atlantic Council, I've had a fair amount of contact with Kuchma. And Kuchma told me something long after he was president. You may recall that during the height of the Orange Revolution, Putin kind of summoned Kuchma to Moscow. They met at the airport. And Kuchma heard from Putin, you have to crack down on the demonstrators. And Kuchma told Putin, you don't understand. Ukraine is not Russia. I can't do that. Kuchma understood that. Zelensky has learned that he has to answer to society, and when he makes mistakes, they could get him into political trouble, and therefore he has to reverse course. And that's what we're seeing here.
Wow. And that brings me to another very interesting, hopefully interesting question. Does Putin understand that Ukrainians are not Russians? Obviously, he doesn't understand that. Otherwise,
obviously he doesn't. That's correct. And we saw it in that very odd, quote unquote, historical tract that he put out months before the big invasion, right? The one he put out in the summer, what was it, of 21?
Pardon me?
He put out a 5,000 word, quote unquote, treatise on Russian and Ukrainian history.
Yes.
Right?
Ridiculous.
And that makes very clear he doesn't understand. So look, I served in Ukraine at the U.S. Embassy from 03 to 06. Putin made serious mistakes during the Orange Revolution. He learned nothing from that. He made mistakes when he entered Ukraine in 14. And he made his biggest mistake of all in Ukraine with the big invasion.
Yes.
He's consistently misunderstood the country.
Absolutely. And I mean, I live in West Germany, and I'm very thankful for you Americans that you have brought this umbrella of protection against Russia, which I was not aware of when I was a young man. It was just a peaceful time. But in fact, it was NATO protecting the free world, and it was America leading the NATO. So we got kind of lazy, and we got kind of comfortable. It's like this story of Hotel Mama, when you are completely in security, and Mama makes the bed and everything, cooks for you, and you don't care of nothing. So it can become the situation that there comes out a very nasty boy who is already adult, 40 years old, and cannot behave and hasn't understood what's going on in the real life. So why do I tell this? I think that we in the West, we also haven't understood what is going on. And excuse me, this long sentence I'm telling you now, but how can we bring the West to understand that we have also that the situation with Russia hasn't changed?
I think Putin has done a pretty good job of teaching this to the West, but it's true that some Westerners have not absorbed the lesson. I mean, look, Scholz's Zeitenwende was not a real Zeitenwende. I think Merz reflects a true Zeitenwende, but there's still a lot of people in Germany who are soft-headed on this, and not just Germany, elsewhere in Western Europe. Now, they've been forced to become less soft-headed because some people in the Trump administration don't understand that Russia is an adversary of the United States. So there's now a problem in our politics with this. And of course, there was a problem when Biden was president because his coddling of Germany on Nord Stream 2 and his refusal to confront Russia across the board, his timidity in arming Ukraine was a serious not just tactical, strategic error. So there are problems in the United States in dealing with a hostile Kremlin, which did not exist 15 or 20 years ago, and certainly not during the Cold War. So we all can get smarter and better, is all I can say. But Putin is helping us learn.
Yeah, but maybe you feel the same. But after 5 years of war, of aggression, there are still discussions going on. Should we deliver more weapons to Ukraine or not? And pro-Russian parties in all countries, especially here in Germany, I can see it, the pro-Russian Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, is rising. And in the eastern parts of Germany, the former German Democratic Republic, so-called Democratic Republic, GDR, they are going to elect now in the counties. They are going to elect the AfD now as a AfD.
The rise of the AfD is a problem for sure.
It's a big problem.
And the Kremlin has been very successful at insinuating propaganda narratives into European political life. But let me offer you a partial, I don't want to go into depth here, analysis for the rise of the AfD. And that is because some very stupid, and I use that word precisely, immigration policies across the EU. I mean, Merkel was very bad on this issue, and this is really what enabled AfD to take off.
Totally agree.
And to this day, this is not really well understood. Elites in Europe were paying no attention to the large majority of their population that did not like these policies, and that opened the door. And of course, the same is true in the United States. Biden's policies were even worse than European policies on immigration, and that enabled the return of President Trump to the White House. And here you had the same dynamics where Russian propaganda narratives made their way into part of right-wing thinking to great peril. And it's amazing, even now, someone like Merkel defends her weak policies towards the Kremlin and defends her bad policies on immigration.
Yeah. It's this topic, never admit mistakes. She is probably also socialized in the former Soviet Union part, GDR. So this is a big strength of Zelensky, that he is able to admit mistakes.
He's had to. I've had a fair amount of dealings with him directly. I don't want to overstate that because I've not been, I've always been an outsider, a non-government, not a former diplomat. I mean, a former diplomat, not a real diplomat. And I would say his instincts on domestic issues in Ukraine are not wonderful. That was true before the big invasion, and it's true since the big invasion. But again, he's been a historic hero as a wartime leader. And the Ukrainians understand that. Those of us in the West who recognize how dangerous Putin is understand that. Mm-hmm. And that is the most important thing. And my hat's off to him for that.
So, but when we speak about making the same mistakes and errors all and over again, I just want to say a quote from the Bible. Really, it's written in Peter chapter 22 verse 2, or the other way around. It's no, maybe I don't quote this one. People, please look it up. If somebody makes the same mistake, it's compared with a dog who does some things which are not so nice. I don't say this now, but it's written in the Bible. And the Bible is full of wisdom. So people who are committing the same mistakes all and over again, they are just stupid. And what makes me so disappointed is that we don't learn out of our mistakes. And this migration thing you've just mentioned, we have it here. And by the way, it was also Putin who provoked the Syrian war, which caused hundreds of thousands of refugees coming to Germany. But we didn't connect it with Putin. We said, right, yeah, it's the bad migration policy of Merkel. Right. No, it was Putin standing all behind of that. And I've been talking with Kurt yesterday about this. Don't we understand that? How can we define that Russia is an enemy, or that we are at war with Russia? That is our problem. We don't see that Russia is at war with us.
That is a problem. I mean, look, we've seen in various American national security documents, including under Trump, intelligence documents, the clear recognition that Russia is our adversary. But it's also true that in many public statements by leaders in the West, including the United States, that point is ignored. And that is a form of, you could say, laziness or of fear. Because if you acknowledge you have this problem, then the question to a leader is, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, right.
And so this is clearly a problem.
Yeah, don't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to use this image of the ostrich putting the head in the sand. The problem is still there, despite you don't see it. It's
That's
there.
Correct. That's absolutely right.
But okay, I just want to focus a little bit on the history now of NATO and of the afterworld time. And I read a very, very interesting book by a great predecessor of your George F. Kennan. He was I tell this for the audience now, George F. Kennan was the ambassador of the United States in Hitler Germany. And later on, he worked in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. He spoke perfectly German and spoke Russian, and he knew Russia completely well. And those times, the Roosevelt administration, they had the same attitude towards Russia: talk, negotiate, talk. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess it was like that. And then came after the Second World War came the Truman administration. And the Truman administration have been asking their embassy in Moscow, what kind of people are the Russians? And George F. Kennan said, you want to know it? By God, you will know it. And then he sat down and wrote a very long telegram, which went into the history called the Long Telegram. And from that point on, the attitude of the United States of America towards Russia changed. And they learned a lot from this telegram. And Kennan, he came to a very high function. And he also was, I think, the man who was standing behind the Marshall Plan to reconstruct Germany and Europe. And so I'm very grateful for you Americans that you have done this to us. And why I'm telling that now, does the nowadays Trump administration have no idea about why there has been NATO, why there has been democracy, why there has been a successful West 80 years ago, 80 years long, it's fantastic times. Why do they want to destroy all that? For me, it looks like they want to destroy it.
I think that the Trump administration view on NATO is not well understood. What's well understood, especially in Europe, but not just in Europe, is that Trump and senior officials under him criticize NATO very loudly and frequently. But there have been fears voiced actually all the time, especially in the run-up to the various NATO summits under Trump as president, suggesting that Trump was going to actually take a serious step that would reduce American participation in, leadership of, and support for NATO. And that has not happened. It did not happen in Ankara a few weeks ago. It did not happen last year at the first NATO summit of the second Trump administration. And it did not happen at the 4 NATO summits when Trump was president during the first term. Okay, so the policy is more complicated and harder to explain than the urban legend about it. But having said that, there are clearly members of the administration, maybe Trump himself, who don't fully appreciate NATO. And I think you're right that this creation of NATO under strong American leadership is what's ensured security, not just in Europe, but globally.
Yes.
Since the end of World War II.
Right.
To our great advantage, America's great advantage, but the advantage of our allies in the entire world. And that's because, again, this will be a quick analysis. American foreign policy elites have been, you might say, the guardians of U.S. NATO policy, explaining it to the American public, explaining it to new politicians, and making them believers in this. But American foreign policy elites discredited themselves during the Bush and Obama years.
Right.
They were fourscore in favor of our interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then Syria and Libya. And while we had to go into Afghanistan after 9/11, we didn't have to do any of those other interventions.
Right.
And those interventions were a disaster. And there was no reckoning in American politics with that failure. So all the senior officials from that time, who were, again, strong advocates of the invasion of Iraq, and then going into Syria and going into Libya, none of them paid a reputational price. And they continued to be seen as wise people, as seers of American foreign policy. After Vietnam, many of the policymakers were seen as failures. That didn't happen here. And that discredited in part of the American political spectrum, especially in right-wing circles, the foreign policy elite. And, I've been active in the debate on our policy towards Ukraine since 2014. And I can't tell you how many times I would debate someone who said we have no interest in Ukraine. They would start by talking about our wars on Iraq and Afghanistan. And I would say to each one of them, why are you bringing this up? You and I agree about those were failures. But you are misapplying the lessons of the Middle East in Europe. And you cannot consider yourself a realist if you can't see the clear differences between our partners in the Middle East when we were fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq and our partners in Ukraine. And of course, they had no argument for that. But that's still the perception, which has made, again, elite opinion, which has always been very strong for NATO, far less potent than it used to be.
Yeah, great description. When you have responsibility, when I want to say otherwise, when you have power, then you have also responsibility. But the United States of America, they grew to such a mighty empire, like let's compare to the Romans even. They became became very, very powerful and mighty, but after a while, you forgot why you became so powerful and mighty, because you have been working and because you have been wise. But when there come new people, they forget about it and they just think it's like a young man who inherited a big fortune of his daddy, who was a billionaire, and the young guy doesn't. I always use images. The young guy doesn't know why he is so rich, and he spends it all without any responsibility. Wow! Yeah. But how can we avoid the very big catastrophe, which I see on the wall already? Many people see it. It's called the World War III. If they continue like that, do you see it also, John? World War III coming if they continue like that?
Again, there have been some adjustments, especially in Europe, regarding the Russian danger. and those adjustments have been, on balance, quite positive. Just they haven't been strong enough, but they are picking up in momentum. There has been, I think, some rethinking in the administration regarding Russia. Certainly, well, Trump is mercurial, so a decision today could become a different decision tomorrow. But right now we're in a period, it's been a period of 6 or 8 weeks, maybe a bit more than that, where Trump is demonstrating more support for Ukraine in its war with Russia. And Trump has taken on board personally the successes Ukraine has enjoyed over the past 3 or 4 months. And the last time Vice President Vance, who had been saying for years, Ukraine will inevitably lose this war because mathematics dictate a Russian victory, the last time he said something of that kind was early March. So that's a sign of growing wisdom.
Okay.
So there are many good things to point to amidst the not so good things, which we've been emphasizing. And the most important thing is weakness in Russia itself. Putin has far greater problems today than Zelensky has, in my opinion, because the Ukrainian people understand they have to fight this war if they want to live as Ukrainians. The Russian people have no interest in this war. They may not oppose Putin's war. They may say, fine, that we Russia got back Crimea, but they're not willing to send their sons to die there. They don't want to have economic problems because of this war. They don't want to go through a cold winter, which they will face this coming winter, given what's happening to their fuel supply. So these are all political problems for Putin in ways that the suffering in Ukraine caused by Putin's aggression are not a political problem for Zelensky.
But usually when Putin is cornered and he's standing with the back on the wall, then he is escalating in the next direction. And do you see any further possibility of escalating? I don't want to use the N word now, and I think this will also not happen. Do you see any other things besides that? Well,
I mean, the thing that always scared Biden, and it's not a good thing when the American president is scared, was Trump's nuclear threats. Biden never behaved as if we were a nuclear superpower, right? Like, so Putin could make us feel fear, but we did not do the right thing, the statesmanlike thing, which is to say to Putin, we've got nukes too, and our nukes certainly our conventional forces are far better than yours, and our nukes are probably better than yours, and you don't want to test us. Trump, to his credit, was not intimidated a year ago when Medvedev was making nuclear threats, and he moved American nuclear submarines closer to Russia's shores. So that's one factor, and I think Putin's been bluffing with nukes, but the actual use of them is far too dangerous. We can't dismiss that possibility, but the chances of it happening are very low. So now other people are talking about a Russian strike, an actual kinetic strike into NATO, as a way to make up for his failures in Ukraine. Here, too, we have to be prepared for it. And he's become increasingly provocative vis-a-vis Poland and the Baltic states, and for that matter, Germany.
That's
right? But he doesn't have the forces to commit to Europe, given his problems in Ukraine. He could do it, but it would be truly a stupid thing. We have to prepare for it. We have to try to deter it. But we should not let that become a reason for us to not give Ukraine what it needs to force Putin to make a just peace.
So, yeah, I see. When I see the watch now, I think our time is running out. I would like to have spoken also about Iran and about China, but maybe will be too much now. So maybe let's wrap it up like this today here. And I thank you very much, John Herbst.
Something in the future as you like. Okay?
And this was a fantastic talk, and I thank you so much for this.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I stop.